The morning she was taken, the sky had turned the color of a wound. Nayland had seen the riders coming from half a mile away, their silhouettes cutting through the red dust of the Arizona basin like dark needles, threading a bleeding cloth. She had been gathering juniper berries along the eastern ridge, her basket half full, her mind still quiet with the peace of early hours. She had not run, not because she lacked the instinct, but because she recognized them before she could name them, the particular kind of men who rode with the certainty of those who had never been denied anything they reached for. There were 4 of them. Hired trackers working under the contract of a cattle baron named Hollis Crane, a man who had decided, with the casual cruelty of wealth, that the Apache families living in the valley below his grazing land were a problem to be solved. He had sent his men out with 2 purposes: to drive off any Apache they found, and to capture any who might be useful as leverage to force the rest to move on. Nayland, alone on the ridge and carrying nothing but a basket, had seemed, to these men, the easiest kind of leverage to take. She did not fight them when they bound her wrists. She had been taught to measure the moment before the moment, to read what could and could not be changed. 4 armed men on horseback. She was alone. The mathematics of survival were not complicated. She would wait. She would watch. And when the right crack appeared in the wall around her, she would push through it like water, finding its way downhill. They rode for most of the day, heading northwest, away from her people's camp, away from the valley where she had grown up knowing every stone and shadow. By the time they reached the outskirts of a settlement called Darrow Creek, the sun had dragged itself to the horizon and was bleeding out against the mountains. The settlement was small, a scatter of buildings around a single main road, a livery stable, a general store, a saloon, and beyond those, a holding pen that had been built to temporarily stable livestock, and which now, apparently, was expected to temporarily stable her. They pushed her inside without ceremony. The gate was latched behind her with a heavy iron bar. She sat in the dirt in the center of the pen and did not look at the men as they walked away laughing. She looked instead at the construction of the fence, the depth of the posts, the space between the planks at the bottom. She looked at the sky above, still pale with the dying light. She listened for any sounds around her that might tell her what kind of place this was, who lived here, how many, whether any among them might be the kind of person whose conscience could be reached. She had not been sitting there more than an hour when she heard the argument. 2 voices, both men, one louder than the other, coming from the direction of the saloon. The louder voice she recognized as belonging to one of the 4 who had taken her. The other voice was quieter, but had an edge to it, a controlled sharpness that cut through the bluster of the first the way a good knife cuts through rope. She could not make out every word, but she caught enough. She heard the words wrong and not legal, and she has done nothing, and I won't stand by and let you. Then there was the sound of boots on packed earth, coming closer, and she sat very still. The man who appeared at the fence gate was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate just enough, with dark reddish, brown hair pushed back from a sun-darkened face and eyes that were the kind of gray that shifts color depending on the light and the mood behind them. He was perhaps 30 years old, or a few years either side. He wore a plain shirt, dusty from riding, and a hat he had pushed back on his head, as if he had forgotten it was there. He looked at her through the fence slats with an expression she had not expected to see on the face of a stranger in a place like this. He looked troubled. He did not speak immediately. He stood and looked at her as if he were trying to work out a question that didn't have a simple answer. She looked back at him with the same steadiness she brought to everything, giving nothing away, reading everything she could from his face and posture and the way he held his hands. Finally he said, "Are you hurt?" She said nothing. This was not because she did not speak English. She had grown up on the edges of two worlds and had learned the language of the settlers the way you learn any survival skill, because knowing it was protection even if using it was risk. But she did not know yet what kind of man this was, and she was not going to hand him anything before she understood what he intended to do with it. He seemed to understand this, or at least he did not take offense. He nodded slightly, as if she had answered him in some way he could interpret. He looked back over his shoulder at the men who had brought her, then back at her. "My name is Cade Merritt," he said. "I have a ranch about 2 miles north of here. I'm going to speak to the sheriff tonight. This isn't right, what they've done, and I intend to say so." Then he left, and she watched him go, studying his stride, the set of his shoulders, trying to determine whether what she had just heard was genuine or merely another kind of trap. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the center of the pen with her back straight and her eyes moving and thought about her family, her mother's hands, her younger brother who had been learning to run the way boys learn, recklessly, joyfully, without yet understanding the particular dangers that would one day make running necessary. She thought about the land, the juniper ridge where she had been standing when they took her, the particular way the morning light fell across it and turned the red rock into something that looked, for just a moment each day, like fire that didn't burn. She thought about death. She had grown up knowing what happened to Apache people who were taken by men like these, who were treated as problems requiring solutions rather than as human beings with families and histories and inner lives as complex as anyone else's. She thought about it the way she thought about most hard things, directly, without flinching, because looking away from a danger never made it smaller. She expected, if she were being honest with herself, that she was unlikely to see her family again. She expected that the men who had taken her would find some use for her as long as she was useful, and then discard her when that usefulness expired. She held this knowledge in her chest like a stone and breathed around it and kept her eyes moving across the fence, the road, the dark sky. In the morning, Cade Merritt returned. This time he had a man with him, heavy-set, with a badge pinned to his shirt that caught the early light. The man with the badge was the sheriff, and he looked uncomfortable in the particular way of men who are being forced by the pressure of their own conscience to do something politically inconvenient. He unlocked the gate and said, in a flat official voice, that there was no lawful cause to hold her and that she was free to go. She stood and walked out of the pen without rushing, without looking at the men who had brought her there, without giving any of them the satisfaction of seeing anything on her face that they might interpret as gratitude or relief or fear. She walked out the gate and into the open road and kept walking, oriented by the position of the sun, heading south and east toward home. She had gone perhaps a quarter mile when she heard hoof-beats behind her. She did not run, she turned. Cade Merritt had followed her on his horse, leading a second one. He stopped a respectful distance away and got down from the saddle and stood with his hat in his hands, which she noticed, because it was the posture of someone asking rather than assuming. "I know you don't have any reason to trust anything I say," he said, "and I know you're more than capable of making your own way home, but those men are still in town, and I don't believe they've gotten any better, mannered overnight. I thought, if you'd allow it, I could ride with you as far as the valley, at least until you're clear of their range." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at his hands, still holding the hat, the knuckles rough from work, no weapon drawn, no tension in the posture of a man about to do something against her will. She looked at his face, the gray eyes that were steady on hers in a way that didn't feel like challenge or contempt, or the particular hunger she had learned to recognize and fear in men who looked at Apache women as if they were objects that had been left unattended. She said, in English, "I know the way." His expression shifted, not surprise exactly, more like a recalibration. He nodded. "I don't doubt that. But," she said, "I'll allow you to ride with me." They rode south. She took the second horse because it was faster than walking, and because she wanted to be home before dark, and because there was something she was still reading about Cade Merritt that she had not finished reading yet. She rode slightly ahead. He made no effort to come alongside her. He kept his pace slightly behind hers, and he did not try to make conversation. And this, more than anything else he had done, told her something important about him. They stopped once, at a water hole she knew but that he seemed surprised to find, and she let the horses drink, and she watched a red-tailed hawk make lazy circles above them in the white sky. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who are paying attention to things other than themselves. Eventually, because the silence had its own kind of weight, and she was curious despite herself, she said, "Why did you argue with them last night? It was not your trouble." He considered this for a moment, pulling at a loose thread on his sleeve. "A thing being not my trouble doesn't mean I can walk past it." He said, "I was raised to believe there's a kind of man who looks away from things like that, and I don't want to be that kind of man. What made you think I hadn't done something to deserve to be there?" "Nothing's done that deserves what I saw," he said. It was a simple sentence, no decoration on it, and it landed with the weight of something genuinely meant. She did not respond. They rode on. When they reached the edge of the valley, where the red rock shelf dropped away, and you could see the familiar geography of homes spread below, the dry creek bed, the cluster of mesquite, the distant smoke of cooking fires, she stopped her horse and looked at it for a moment before she looked back at him. "This is far enough," she said. He nodded and tipped his hat, which she had learned by now was a gesture of respect rather than condescension when he made it. He started to turn his horse. "Merritt," she said. He looked back. "I am Nayland," she said. "I will remember what you did." He held her gaze for a moment. "I hope the next thing you remember about a stranger is something better than yesterday," he said. Then he turned and rode north, and she watched him go until he was a small dark shape against the pale dust, and then nothing at all. She did not think about Cade Merritt every day after that. She had her life, her people, her work, the rhythms of days that moved around her like water around stone. But she thought about him sometimes. In the particular way you think about something that has unsettled a certainty you held without knowing you held it. She had believed, in the wordless way of long experience, that men of his kind did not do what he had done. She filed this new information away the way she filed away everything she learned, carefully, in a place where it would not be lost. 3 months later, a drought burned through the valley like a slow fever. The creek dropped to a trickle. The grazing dried to dust. Holly's crane, who had never let a season's difficulty stop him from expanding what he believed was his, sent riders out again, this time with papers he claimed were legal documentation of his right to the water source that fed the valley. Whether these papers were genuine or fabricated by a paid lawyer was a question without a practical answer, because the man holding them had 4 armed men beside him, and questions tend to become academic in the presence of that many guns. Nayland's family and the other families with them were not the kind of people who gave up what was theirs without a fight, but they were also not the kind of people who threw lives away on a battle. They could not win that day. They would move. They would come back when the season shifted things. They had done this before. The land remembered them even when they had to leave it, and they remembered the land, and that mutual memory was a kind of ownership that no paper could touch. But in the confusion of the moving, in the dust and the loaded horses and the children being hurried along and the men watching the ridge for riders, Nayland's younger brother, Chayton, who was 13 and fast and sometimes faster than his own judgment, ran back for something he had left behind, and came back into a situation that had changed while he was gone. Two of Crane's riders had doubled back, and they had him. Nayland heard him shout. She turned without thinking and ran back, and the calculation she had made 3 months ago in the holding pen, 4 armed men, I am alone, wait was not in her mind at all. He was her brother. The mathematics of survival did not apply. She got to them before the other adults did, and she did not stop running until she was between Chayton and the men who held him. She was not armed. She stood there with her hands open at her sides and looked at the riders with a steadiness that was not bravado, because bravado is for people who are afraid of being seen as afraid, and she was past that kind of concern. One of the riders was the loud one from before, the one whose argument Cade Merritt had cut through with that quiet voice in the dark. He recognized her. She could see it in his face, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the recalibration of his cruelty. What happened next happened fast. There was shouting. There was the sound of more horses, coming from the north rather than the direction the trouble had come from, and then there was Cade Merritt, with 2 of the men from his ranch, pulling up hard between her and the riders with an expression on his face that she had not seen there before, not the troubled thoughtfulness of a man weighing a moral question, but something cold and settled and very clear. He had been riding to find her family to warn them. He had heard what Crane was planning and had ridden to warn them. He had arrived, by the particular luck of the world when it occasionally behaves itself, at the exact right moment. The loud rider looked at him. This isn't your concern, Merritt. I seem to keep finding myself concerned, Cade said. Let the boy go. There was the long moment that happens before things either escalate or back down, the moment that seems to contain both possibilities equally, during which everyone decides what kind of story this is going to be. Then the rider let Chayton go, and Chayton ran to Nayland, and she put her hand on the back of his neck, the way you hold onto something you almost lost, and did not look away from the riders until they had turned and ridden back the way they came. Afterwards, when the families had moved to the seasonal camp farther west, and the immediate crisis had settled into the ordinary difficulty of displacement, Nayland sat with Cade Merritt at the edge of the camp and looked at the stars coming out over the desert and said, "This is the second time. I know," he said. "Why are you still riding around saving Apache people from Hollis Crane's men?" He was quiet for a long moment. Honest answer, I wouldn't ask for another kind, because somewhere along the way it stopped being about principle, he said. Which is to say, the first time was principle. After that, it was something else. She looked at him sideways, not letting him see the full weight of her attention yet. What's something else? He picked up a small stone and turned it in his hands and set it down. I've been thinking about you since I watched you ride away into that valley, he said. About the way you sat in that pen all night without breaking. About the way you got on that horse without making anything of it. About the way you told me you'd remember what I did like it was. Gift you were giving me. I've been thinking about you the way you think about something you want to understand better. And the closer I get to it, the more I realize I just want to be around it. The desert night was very quiet. The stars over them were extravagant, the way they are only in open country, far from anything that makes artificial light. That is either the most honest thing a man has said to me, Nayland said, or the most elaborate deception. I don't have the patience for elaborate, he said. She almost smiled. He saw it. Over the weeks that followed, with the practicality that survival required taking up most of each day, Cade found reasons to be in the area. He brought supplies that were genuinely needed, not as a way of buying anything, but because he had a ranch and resources, and the families had been displaced from their water source and were managing. He worked alongside the men without making himself the center of anything. He learned a few words of the Apache language, not enough to be impressive, just enough to show he was paying attention. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He helped with a fence repair that took 3 days and said nothing more profound during those 3 days than practical things about lumber and posts and the particular stubbornness of desert ground, and Nayland watched all of this. She was not a woman who arrived at trust quickly. She had too much evidence about the world to be careless with it. But she had also been raised by people who understood that truth shows itself in what you do across many days rather than in what you say at the right moment. And across many days, Cade Merritt showed her the same thing she had first read in his face in the dark outside the holding pen. She tested him, in the ways she tested things, with silence and with directness, and with questions designed to reveal whether a person's professed values were real or performed. She told him hard truths about what her life was, and watched his face for the particular kind of discomfort that means a person is discovering a reality is more complicated than their idea of it. She told him about her family's history with the land, the generations of it, the particular grief of watching something ancient and rooted be treated as if it had no depth. He listened without defending the world that had caused that grief. He listened the way you listen when you're not waiting to explain yourself, but actually receiving what's being given to you. One evening in late October, when the desert had cooled enough to be beautiful rather than brutal, she told him that she had thought about death the night they put her in that pen. She told him she had expected to not see her family again. She told him the way she told most things directly, without decoration, watching his face. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad you were wrong." "So am I," she said. He looked at her, and for once he didn't look away or qualify it or soften it. "Nayland," he said, "I know I'm not, I know this is not." He stopped and tried again, with more honesty than elegance. "I want to ask you something that I have no right to ask, and that I'll respect whatever answer you give. I want to ask if you'd consider spending your life alongside mine. Not—" He stopped again.